Hi everyone, my name is Shashaank, and I'll be covering today for Product School the product. How does product management differ at different stages of a company? So, just a quick brief on the agenda. I'll start with my background. I'll cover the different stages of a company in terms what are the various attributes of product management, the different aspects like feature prioritization, customer insights, metrics, process and ownership, rollouts and experiments. And then finally, before I close in, I want to also cover how do you choose the right stage for yourself. Once you know how these stages differ, how do you know which ones to what makes sense for you at your career and where you should go for that. So let's start with a quick, a quick intro about myself. I've spent around 11 years on product management in various consumer and now most recently in like B2B enterprise roles. I founded two companies in the past, but the part where I'm taking the session today is I've overall these 11 years have spread across various stages of a company. Since I founded two companies, I have spent time in seed and angel funded firms. I've worked with Series A, growth stage firms, which are Series B and beyond. And also, most recently, I've been working with Uber, which was, I would say, a decacorn at that stage, and then went to IPO for a multi-billion-dollar company that it is today. Uh, Largely, right now, quickly about myself, I'm leading products at Uber for connecting customer channels, and also started. And I didn't start my career in product management. I in fact started with McKinsey as an analyst, but went into product management when I started my companies. Overall, an engineer and an MBA by education. So let's look at what are the different stages of a company, and I've decided, I've divided them into three phases. The first one is an early or a pre-market fit, which is your typically 0 to 1 journey. What I've shown on the left is the paying customers. What it really means to say is, at this stage, you really hardly have any regular paying customer. You're still exploring what you're doing. The second big phase is the growth stage of post product market fit. Now, this is a bit of a challenge because this is really expansive. Potential could have divided into 2 or even 3 more phases. But I wanted to keep a same one, for simplicity, I'm just combining it into one. And where you're trying to going from a market fit to getting those million plus paying customers, and then comes your enterprise, where you go from a million customers to not let's say a billion, but let's say a billion in billings. This does not mean, to be clear, not unicorns. Unicorns might still be to a large extent in the growth phase, but these are companies which have really gone through that cycle and have matured up. So to quickly, give a rundown of how I've thought about these, as I've kind of pegged them on what the company's focus area is, how they're growing, what's the company age, and some examples. So for early and pre-market fit, pre-product market fit companies, the company focus is, just exploring what customers will love. They're still trying to figure out what they should sell, what they should build. And the focus largely on the firm is making sure they get to that before the money runs out. So the really key is on every day, you'll see the focus of the company is on survival. They typically are not growing organically, and that's why they don't have the product market fit. So there's not enough, really a lot of growth. Typically, the company would be about less than 3 years of age. It's rare for a company that does not achieve market fit in 3 years to be able to still continue still experimenting. And examples are, your typically Y Combinator companies or angel and seed funded companies in this case. For the growth or the post market fit firms, they have found out what customers love. Now, what they're trying to do is just expand that solution, that is growing already organically. They want to double down on that, and they want to double down on that by reducing the friction for people to access the tool, and also by increasing the distribution channels. They are growing exponentially. Even if they don't market, they are growing organically in this case. Just, marketing is just putting fuel on fire to just really grow, a lot more in this case. The company age is really wide. I would say anything between, the first year till about 10 years. Typically, company that's beyond 10 years will achieve a maturity stage that will either be a steady state company or move or migrate to the enterprise scenario. Some of the firms have chosen and tried to cover the US, Europe, and India markets are Substack, Fast.co, Postman, Unacademy, and Tier Mobility. And the final stage is enterprise. These are mature companies which are trying to maintain the profitable growth or trying to be profitable at this stage. The growth rate is starting to taper off. This is just for a caveat. This is the growth rate, not the growth by itself. These companies might still be growing by a large extent, sometimes as high as 50% plus, but the growth rates have come down over the years. You will see a company will typically take at least about 7 years to get to the stage. Typically companies I'm talking about here is Fang, Microsoft, Uber, Dropbox, Spotify, Booking, Airbnb. One caveat before we go ahead is, these are the typical, the segmentation here done is for your AC80 percentile, but you'll always have 10% outliers on both sides where, there might be actually younger companies in the different bracket, or they might have reached, a lot more paying customers much sooner. And you might have a lot more companies which might be about to migrate from, let's say, especially the growth stage to an enterprise, because that's a really wide area. So take that with a pinch of salt, but this is just to give an aggregated view. So let's look at some aspects of product management, and let me first start with the feature prioritization. Any PM discussion isn't complete if you don't mention the word priority enough times. So let me kick off with that. And how does feature prioritization differ for PMs across the three phases? The one thing that's common that each PM will need to make sure is that eventually they are the ones who hold what features need to be built now versus later, or potentially even never. That's something that stays common. But what differs is in the early stages, the decision making is much more simpler, largely on the PM, how he wants to, or he or she wants to prioritize. Obviously, you'll be taking the founders into consideration of what they are pitching something to the investors, what features or what metrics they need to show. But you can really, really optimize for the velocity of a launch. Much simpler. The key skills you'll need here for someone operating at this level would be, you need to make sure you have you do have some product instincts on understanding what customers will love, because the experimentation, you might be pivoting a bunch of times, you might be trying different product and ideas, and you won't not always have the time to go after customers and check with them. You need to have a good product sense in this case. For someone looking at the growth and the post-market, product market fit stage, this is a state where you have typically many good choices, many good options, but you can do all of them. You need to really drill down into what's the key customer insight and the problem that will help you capture impact, right? And the way to get that would be obviously through different things like UX studies, field visits, and many others, and we'll cover that more in detail in the next slide. Along with that, you'll also need to understand, earlier on the engineering agility would be much faster at the early stage. At this stage, there will be a reasonable amount of tech debt. The engineering, how does the engineering scale up? Do the engineering want to kind of change the languages, or the overall tech stack? Different things come into picture. So you need to factor for that as you prioritize. You cannot just look at only impact, which you might have done before. So that becomes really crucial. One of the key skills here is you have to get comfortable analyzing data. You'll have different forms of data in terms of qualitative and quantitative. You will need to take quick and rapid decisions based on that. And for someone operating at an enterprise level, the challenge really lies here as when you look at prioritization, as how do you align what your customer problems are with the key company goals? And how do you balance with external team dependencies? Because you will have many times you'll have so many dependencies for even your roadmap. So the complexity really goes high over here. At the outset, it sometimes seems simpler that how can a company goals be misaligned with the customer problems, but since the company is at such a big scale, they might have so many customer metrics and they might have so many customer goals, and you might be building a feature and you might not be able to tie how does it connect with the company goal. Tying that up and prioritizing a feature becomes essential. Making sure that you're able to influence multiple teams across the company becomes really crucial here, because you will be working with tons and tons of teams over here. You need to make sure if you have to ship something out, it's on their radar as well. So, the key skill that becomes really crucial for a PM here is how do you influence someone from top to bottom that they need to be working on that feature? That's like a non-negotiable key skill that you'll need at this stage. Let's look at customer insights. And the one common thing you'll see here is, you will have multiple customers and consumers for a product. The PMs need to own each and every customer who uses their product and how do they get their feedback, figure out how to get that done. So for the early and pre-market fit stage, I would say at this stage, not only you should know your customers by name, your top loyal customers should know you by your name, which means you should have called them and talked to them enough number of times that they know you. They can reach out to you with their face and shoe. Pick up the phone line and talk to them. The data is really thin at this stage. You don't really want to rely too much on that. You could go for customer feedback and some behavioral analytics tools like Google Analytics and Optimizely, but it's not going to help you tons and tons except the basics of that. You really need to be engaged with your customers. So the one thing you need to make sure is whoever is managing this at the product level, you have to be really comfortable talking to your customers directly, picking up the phone or even going and meeting them. I've worked in the past and I've seen, many teams are not comfortable doing that. This is something you'll just have to get into the shoes and get it out. For someone looking at the growth stage, you will start getting a lot more tons of feedbacks in this case. You need to institute a method to keep a pulse on the customer insights, because you'll have insights from field visits, you'll have UX studies being done, you'll have customer feedback channels, customer support channels. So you have tons of feedback, but you don't really have to bring them together. And you need to start kind of making sure that whatever inputs they have, they start routing it to you. Along with that, you also need to make sure you'll be shipping a lot more features and the team will start expanding. How do you capture key essential data on your product for different customer journeys? And I've seen if you miss out on that in the early days when you're growing, it becomes really difficult for the next PMs or once you reach a much bigger scale to be able to do that or even make sense of the data. So one of the key skills here is you should have the ability to really visualize a customer journey, structure it well, break it down, and just know how to instrument the data and where to capture that. For the enterprise, there's abundance of insights. In fact, in this case, you have dedicated UX research, you have data science teams, you have potentially market research, dedicated customer support teams. But what happens is there's really high friction because the PMs at this stage are most distanced with the end customer at this stage. These things will not organically come to you. You need to make an effort. You need to make sure your UX team is not only working for you, they're supporting multiple other teams. They're doing their own prioritization. How do you get in their roadmap and understand what they've done and how you can use that data? So that becomes a key skill. And how do you collaborate with the various teams who hold insights? So let's look at metrics. How does metrics and the data change? At each stage, one of the common things would be you need to own a customer-centric product metric as one of your top-line metrics. This seems obvious, but trust me, it's not that obvious. At every stage, you do end up giving into vanity metrics. You might always have a vanity metric, but as a PM, go to first principles, make sure what really matters to your customer and how do you know about that from a metric that you measure. So, for early stage, don't make it complicated. Look at the key focus for you is you need retention, you need growth. Are you looking at any top or through metrics, that kind of give you those metrics? Obviously, you'll have different funnels. You might be looking at many other, your cart value, let's say if you're an e-commerce site or others, but you really can't obsess about that. If people are not coming back to shop on your e-commerce platform, there's no point of, even if the cart value is, $1 or a 10, they just don't like to come back. So make sure you are true to your customer retention and growth metrics in this case. Since you'll not have a high chance that you'll not have any product or a data analyst, the PMs at this stage need to make sure they have enough expertise to be able to analyze the data. You pretty much are your own data science or the data analyst team in this case. When you start looking at the growth stage, there's enough sample of data now. You have grown, the company has grown to a couple of 100,000 or million users. But the problem there is the data is typically not structured well, and there is no process for getting insights from this data. So what you need to really do is start deep diving into your funnels. First is, build detail and analysis of your funnels. Where does your customer interact? Work with your data science teams or data analyst teams to kind of capture that. And also start putting a process for how do you can, on a regular basis, start getting these insights without you having to deep dive every time. And that's where, you typically will have the option in this case to have a data analyst or, a product analyst for these deep dives, but you need to guide them on what you really want to learn, what's your priority and what's top of your mind. Key skills would be, I would say, how do you understand the framework right, to capture the product metrics for every feature you're releasing. And when I say framework, it's also, what data capture, but also where to capture it. How does your data science is going to consume it? How does it make sense, right? Because if you just pass it on to engineering and connected them, they'll not always understand it because they know what you have in mind, right? How do you want to capture that data and how you're going to use that? So you really need to be the glue between your data science or the data team and the engineering team. Sometimes the UX teams wants to get some data. The PM needs to should be accountable on making sure everything that's captured is in a consumable format. For the enterprise, this is again a state. Uh, Enough, like more than insights that you can consume. You'll have so much tons of data and insights. You'll not be able to catch up with everything. So, and also the challenge here lies that you'll writing queries and analyzing data, which you might have been doing before, is just going to get harder, right? A need for a data science team becomes essential because the data is so much. And even if, you're coming from a programming background, you've done, you can do analysis in Python, you just won't have the time to do that every time. You might have do for a one-off analysis, but you can't really rely on yourself to be able to do that. And so that's why, this becomes really crucial on how do you work with the data science team and giving them, what are the deep dives you want to do, and also really prioritize analysis for them. At the same time, since you're looking at product metrics, what kind of gets missed out at this stage is, since you're profitable, your product metrics should really, roll into some financial and operational metrics for the company. Otherwise, you'll not even know you're improving product, but operationally nothing's getting improved, right? And let's say you are increasing the usage for, let's say in Uber's case, give an example. Hypothetically, we have made some changes where, we're seeing more usage for cash, let's say, for the Uber. But operationally and financially, is it, are we seeing more fraud being happen? Are we seeing collections being happened? Or are we spending more cost to, disperse cash to drivers? These are things, you probably need to understand before, you start looking at just focus on product metrics. How does it really impact the company in those scenarios? So, the key skill becomes here is, how do you know which metrics really, which product metrics really make an impact and which don't, and make sure you have tied your key performance and OKRs on those. So looking at process and ownership, no surprises here. As process starts increasing with scale, ownership starts decreasing, right? Because you don't own the process starts owning you. For early stage, they definitely have the advantage here. It's probably one-man show, to large extent, or few people show in this case. The PMs, own the end-to-end life cycle, including project management, data, UX research. The result is you have high ownership, you have very low processes and very high velocity. The one thing, the key skill is that, are you able to wear multiple hats? As a PM, you will not have the option. You'll have to do all of these things. Make sure you're comfortable doing that. For someone in the growth stage, you will have other functional teams in this case, your usability testing, your engineering testing, your data and design. So that's good, but that does not mean you'll have lower ownership. The PM still will have, to a large extent, a very high ownership, even though there'll be now many other products. But you need to make sure you're able to align these different teams to work on the most important problems. When they get started, they'll not know what's important, and they might be supporting other PMs as well. How do you make sure everyone's aligned and on what they should be spending their time on? And from a skill set point of view, you might not always have the option to hire every team, even if you're growing. So look at what are your key weak areas and try to get the functional experts to help with those. So let's say if you're PM with someone who has a good background on data, maybe and if you have a talent crunch, you might be able to do some bit of data analysis yourself, but maybe you'll need someone on project management or someone on the design side. Whereas if you're someone from a design background, you might need some more help on data, and make sure you are able to voice that to the founders or to the LT to be able to get that bandwidth support. At an enterprise level, this is, we're talking about the best in class processes, end to end across the life cycle. This has matured up. You have people coming from Google's and others who have set up these processes, or even, the likes of top consulting. So I don't think so there's any dearth of that. But the thing is that also leads to very low velocity of execution because you have to have multiple sign-offs. You need to align with multiple teams in this case. What happens is, as the product has matured up, the product becomes into very small individual features, which are really complicated by themselves, especially when you cut across different geographies. So each feature has a different functional owner, and that reduces the overall ownership of the single product. And what happens is, if you really want to succeed in these processes and do well, one of the key things I can share is the knowledge and the depth of the network you've gained in the bigger firm really lends value of how do you get things faster than usual. Otherwise, on the process, you will follow to the T, but there are things you might miss out, and you will go back to the back to the queue, and then your probably launches can get delayed, or you'll not know where the gaps are. Whereas someone who knows the process and someone who knows how to accelerate, knows people and get things done is definitely a key skill set that will help you deliver really some good stuff at the scale. And finally, looking at rollouts and experimentation. So one common thing is PMs need to own and the testing of their products themselves. No matter what size of the firm, you at least need to do some basic level of testing yourself before you ship something. So in the early stage, like I mentioned, the velocities are you rollouts are much simpler. You don't have too much of phasing of releases, like you don't do 10%, 50%, or 100% over weeks. You typically can start with a day or two for 10 and just go to 100 if you don't see any systems going down, and that too even for some major releases. But experimentation is fairly limited as well. You might be experimenting on different ideas of features and products, but you'll not really be doing A/B testing. There's not enough customers to be able to do that. The one thing you need to make sure is you need to be really hands-on with the entire life cycle, release management life cycle of a feature. So in this case, when I used to release anything on the Play Store, it's just that I don't, it's not about just uploading the APK. And in fact, sometimes I used to do that, not just the engineering, but then you also need to go to the Play Store. You need to write, the different what's new. You need to make sure your screenshots are updated. And all of that will be done by me. And I'm sure different PMs have been at this stage. So you really need to be hands-on with that. Whereas for the growth stage, what will happen is as your exponentially growing, your systems will start to go down. You will not have factored for certain things. With every new release, you'll see something or the other go down, which means as a PM, you need to start putting some rigor and structure to your release processes to make sure those things don't happen. And this is also a good time because you have tons of data. How do you introduce some A/B experimentation, right? As customer data has increased, how you can really learn what path to go after. Like I mentioned, at this stage, it's typically a choice of multiple good options, but you don't know sometimes, no matter how much you prioritize, what's good, and maybe the efforts are same. How do you accelerate learning is through these experimentation. So the key skills for a PM here would be make sure you have a cool head. Things will go wrong. Things will really break. And this is what we meant when you take break things and move fast, things will break here. Keep a cool head and make sure you are, when you're experimenting, don't overdo an experimentation, right? You understand experimentation frameworks, what metrics you want to solve for, and what are the experiments you want to run. Otherwise, you end up slowing the team. It's sometimes exciting to experiment a lot, but a lot of times it will not yield value. Some things don't even need experiment. So you need to have a good sense of that. And finally, for the enterprise, again, like I mentioned, first class, best in class industry processes, experimentation is, to the core DNA of these firms. Every release have a very structured, phased out releases. In fact, the process typically involves or even is led by other teams, not the product manager themselves. Example, in Uber, we sometimes have products lead that. You'll have a data teams contribute to that, or you might have program management teams really coordinating the entire end-to-end life cycle. What's great about this phase is, in terms of rollouts, the impact is huge because you're talking about 1 billion plus people, even if, 1 billion plus, revenue, customers, whichever you want to look at, a percentage of that is really high. You're talking about a couple of millions of impact. But the downside is, because it's such high impact, you want to be really careful. And so the realization of that impact is low because a full 100% release could take sometimes a couple of months itself and up to a year, depending on the feedback cycle and how things have progressed. So that's where you need to have patience and be able to kind of hold that foot strong. The key skill I would say is you need to have, as a PM, a very strong project management capabilities. And this is not project management capabilities, you probably would have seen at the early stage or even at the early growth stage. This is really different. You have so many different teams you're coordinating with. So if you don't have a really good dedicated program management team, that becomes an essential skill for a PM to own at this stage. Although I would say not scalable. You at some stage, you will need some form of program management, from one team or the other to be able to really deliver on other goods. And so for my final slide, we've covered all different aspects of PMs, but how do you choose what particular stage is good for you? And I've tried to break that down based on my experience, what I've done as I've worked for it. And I've kind of clubbed it into two phases. One is you don't have any product experience, or you are a tenured product manager and you're taking a call. So let me first start with first, if you are a fresh graduate and you're breaking into the PM role, what I would recommend is actually, lean towards a lot more on the growth side or the enterprise scale side. The reason for that is you'll typically have good mentorship. You either will be working in a very fast-paced environment and will grow really a lot like a rocket ship. Also, you will learn the craft. You will have time to do that under seasoned professionals. Typically in the early stage, there's really no time. There's a really high expectation. There's no time to be coached or to learn, and the risks is too high. So, typically, let's say you spend a year, you might not have learned as much as you would have learned in the other places. Whereas if you talk about the experienced professionals, it's kind of a little different. I would say, and these are professionals who don't have product experience, but let's say in sales, ops, business as well. I would actually say the early pre-market fit might be a good stint for you if you are entrepreneurial and you're getting good skin in the game and you don't mind chaos. It might be actually good for you to accelerate a career, and actually sort of starting your own company might be a good alternative to be able to help a talented group to achieve that. Also, at the same time, if your skill sets or whatever you've learned in your domain is being used by another startup, it might be good to join a company at this stage, a growth company where you can lend your domain expertise and also start capturing, some product inputs and product insights and get into that career. Whereas when it comes to the enterprise or scale versions, I would say it's probably a less ideal situation because you'll have very limited options to really build depth unless there is a very structured plan within the firm. So if your current company gives you that option, that's probably best. But if you're trying externally, first, it's really hard to break into these roles unless you have a product background. And even if you get in, typically you're expected to, start operating and you don't get to do in depth, you're kind of stretched out in the product. And so you're pretty much doing a lot more program management. So would probably just caution that. So talking of, the last section of tenured product managers, and if you're looking at, if you like someone who likes structure and high performing teams, stay wary, I would say, of the early stage companies or even to some extent to early growth stage companies. You'll not see a lot of processes over there, a lot of structure. In fact, you might have to be the person putting those things in. So, things can change every month in early stage companies or every quarter even in a growth stage companies. You will definitely like working in a big enterprise scale where, there's very high impact teams working on very focused goals because there's more predictability to it. And you are able to increase your breadth in the product, right? You already might have someone who has some depth, but you want to see the breadth of the product across different teams, and that should be a good opportunity. Whereas if someone who likes to have high growth and ownership, what might really work for you is, an early stage company because, it's a great fit if you are part of the core team and you do thrive in war times. So if you want that ownership, go for it. It's probably one of the better options. Or otherwise, if you're in a mid-career, you're not getting that leadership in your own current firm, you might want to explore the growth stage where you can lead from the front or, actually own a lot bigger chunk of piece and set your own culture and get a very high impact in your career in this stage. Whereas, if you're looking at an enterprise company at this stage, since, you will be limited, if you're looking for high growth, you will be kind of limited for your growth based on the company's growth. So, the company's growing at, let's say, 10 or 20%, you can't really grow. I mean, typically you'll not grow faster than that on an average. So, you will get stalled and might not be the best experience. Also, until you plan to stay there for a longer period of time, it does not make sense, because the more you stay there, the ownership goes up, and that means a couple of years. So if you're just thinking that you want to spend 2 years and get high ownership, it's going to be really hard at the scale. So think about it, as you look at your options. So yeah, so that's it from my side. I hope this is helpful. Just to give a snapshot of how PMs, the product varies across different stages, and how, if you're thinking of a career change, what are some key things to keep in mind. Uh, Let me know if you have any follow-up questions. Happy to take that. That's my Twitter handle. I'm not the most active, but I do occasionally check it, and we'll get back to you guys. Thank you so much.